Hello and welcome to our Synod resource video, one of a series of videos which we hope will help all the Synod members, lay people and priests, and indeed everyone who is involved in our great synodal journey. Over the last few months, as you know, we've been working very hard to take the first stage of our synodal journey together, leading to 2025, and that's been an occasion of listening, of inviting all of us to listen to as many different voices within the church, voices on the margins of the church, voices beyond the church. And from what we've heard back from parishes and from participants, they found this a tremendously positive experience. Many responses have come in, they've been gathered, they're in the process of being read, and out of that some themes will emerge. And the next stage for the members of the Synod is to look at those themes, to reflect on them, to pray about them, and so to discern the road ahead. You'll be hearing a lot about the word discernment. Is it the same as to decide? To discern is a kind of religious version of decide. No, it isn't. There's something deeper about it. When we decide things, yes, maybe we weigh up the evidence and then we go into a gathering having decided what we think. And sometimes we end up fighting our own corner, sticking to what we think. We're asked in a discerning process to listen throughout the whole of the process, to listen to God, and also to listen to what others are saying. And the first condition of listening is we need to be prepared for that situation when what we hear might enable us to change our minds. It might not happen, it might confirm us in what we think, but it might enable us to change our mind, to see things in a different light. So discerning is listening to God, and listening to God inside of ourselves, listening to God through the voices of others, and having that sense that what we feel God is saying to us is the right thing. So discernment flows from the deep listening that we've been doing, that we've been practicing already. And in those weeks and months ahead, there'll be opportunities to further develop that listening. Today, I don't want to go into the how and the why and the what, the methodology, if you like. That will happen at a later date. Today, I just want to focus on some of the principles that guide our discerning, both collectively as the church, as a parish, and even our discerning in our individual everyday lives. First of all, the way we enter into discerning is important. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm praying, sometimes when I'm saying Mass, I rush in. It's all very quick. My mind is all over the place, and it just seems a muddle. And I know I need to calm myself. I know I need to quieten myself. I know I can't rush in to prayer or to celebrating the Eucharist too quickly. I need to calm myself, and then I need to begin. And that foundation and principle that allows us to calm ourselves is to know that we are being held by God in love, to be in touch with God's love for us, to be in touch with the God who gazes with love at us and delights in what God sees. A theologian to both Pope Paul VI and Pope John Paul II, now St. Paul VI, and St. Paul II said that discernment is God's adamant unwillingness to leave us to our worst selves, to hold this basic disposition that God is not going to leave us to our worst self, but bring out the best in us. That is fundamental. So we enter into this discernment without fear, without insecurity, we can trust. We can trust that God is speaking to us. We can trust that he'll speak to us in our listening, and he'll give us the opportunity to arrive at the best possible decisions. And who better to illustrate this journey of discernment than Mary, our Blessed Mother? Just think for a moment about the story of the Annunciation. The Gospel tells us that Mary was deeply disturbed by what was being asked of her. Just imagine for a moment, her mind would be in turmoil. But she hears the words, "Mary, do not be afraid. You have won God's favour." Being immersed in God's love and in God's favour, she could now breathe freely, and from a place of balance inside of her, she could rise and offer her words. "Yes, let what you have said be done to me." So that first fundamental insight, that disposition, is for us to reflect on the unconditional love of God. Without that first awareness, without that deep conviction, it's difficult enough to make any headway. The commitment to God's unconditional love is the powerful basis for all our growing and for all our transformation. St. Ignatius of Loyola gave a great legacy to the Church around discernment. And he reminded us that when we have that balance within our hearts, that he talks about indifference, but we might misunderstand that as mean a couldn't care less attitude. It's very far from that. It's the place of openness inside of ourselves, not a knee-jerk reactivity, but an attitude of inner freedom. As the great St. Teresa of Avila says, encouraging her sisters and all our sisters and brothers to eat the bread of self-awareness every day. So as we enter into that discernment process of what's emerged so far in the Synod, some questions might be of help. How well do I know myself? Do I know what gives me life? And can I recognise that which deadens me? It's being able to notice when I do feel most alive, when I'm at peace, when I'm my best self. What brings an increase in faith and hope and love? It's when we're operating out of that sense of consolation that we are more likely to recognise what the Spirit is saying to us and discern from all that's emerged in our Synod journey thus far where the Lord, where the Holy Spirit might be leading us. Are we aware of when we feel most down, when we feel negative, what drains the life out of me, when I'm drawn and when I'm driven? Because that puts us in the wrong place to discern. That desolation means that we can't easily feel the voice of the Spirit within us. Now, all of this requires self-awareness, but it's not as difficult as it may sound. It's just thinking, where am I in the presence of God within me? Am I sensing his life, or am I feeling drained? Do I know myself well enough to recognise when I'm in the place where I can be most open to God and most creative? As we engage in the process of discerning the movement of the Spirit in what's emerged so far, notice also how our bodies offer us clues for when we're in the right place to discern, when we feel free rather than taut, when we recognise that when we enter into a situation, a discussion with which we're not particularly comfortable, we don't go all tense. We learn simply to breathe and to listen to the voice of the Spirit and that surrender to the presence of God within us, that freedom to listen without fear, without insecurity. And of course, it goes without saying that discernment is a prayerful activity. St. Ignatius bids us to trust that God doesn't leave us to our own devices. He invites us to ask constantly for the help of the Holy Spirit to discover God's hopes, God's dreams for us and for the whole Church of Salford. In his writing on discernment and right disposition, Irish Jesuit Father Jerry O'Hanlon emphasises the need to pray, to ask in particular for freedom from all bias, particularly that hidden bias that we don't recognise in ourselves, and self-delusions, not to mention the pressures that are upon us, for an honest recognition of the basis of our natural and sinful self-interest, and a recognition of our resistance to the concerns and voices of others, our capacities for self-deception and our rigidities and compulsions. It's an awful lot to be aware of. Above all, we need to be aware of the light of God's grace that illuminates all of that, so we can act out of, we can decide out of, we can react out of us, out of all that's life-giving, all that's of God, and above all, to be open for what Pope Francis has called the God of surprises.